In China, right now, top players are focusing on Vi, not Jinx, for their Punk reroll compositions. Why is that? I thought Vi was kind of a meme. Is Vi carry actually legit, or is China just trying to leak us to false tech? In this episode of In Too Deep, we're going to dive into why CN really believes that Vi is the real carry of Punk, and just how effective she can be in a tournament environment. Terry is a player from Taiwan who has competed in several tournaments before and is a seasoned veteran. He's won tournaments in his local region. Even though people don't talk about Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Macau as being, one of the strong power players within SEA or APAC in general, Terry's an accomplished player in his own local region. The portal that we're starting off is 3-cost champion, so you get a little bit extra gold than normal. So the way he can approach this right now is to think about if he can make econ early. Some people actually choose to sell things like this Echo and a bunch of their 1-cost so they can guarantee 10, but in this spot he's choosing not to because I don't know if he has any 1-cost that can specifically solo 1-3 guaranteed. I think Corki can, but dependent on your crits. There is a list of 1-cost you can actually play to guarantee 10 gold at stage 1-3 in particular, and that's like Olaf, Tahm Kench, some melee units that can sustain themselves. But some of these more fragile, either assassin based units or range units are a lot weaker because their base stats are lower. There's actually a useful infographic that people have included to help you understand what can solo stage 1-3 and 1-4, but a lot of them are conditional. We skipped the Tarek because Disco is bad. We're going to pick up this Jinx instead. We do have a bow, so that's good. Because we have the early bow, we can definitely think about having Jinx either as an item holder or maybe even reroll the Punk. But let's go ahead and take a look at the augments first and see if that helps influence our decision. Team building is something that is actually pretty okay for low cost reroll in general, but with Punk, it doesn't feel like it gives you enough value relative to where you can use it for 2s and 3 costs, which are much more expensive and therefore more rare. A lot of times when you're playing Punk, you're looking for combat power and not necessarily things like straight up economy and gold. This is because Punk tries to win the early game and then it falls off in the late stages of the game. And so you want to be strong early so you can preserve a lot of HP and then bleed out in the late stages of the game. But he could take something like team building if he wants to lean into 2 and 3 cost reroll. He does have the equivalent of Quicksilver in the form of the components here on this bench. And so he could theoretically say, hey, I want to go team building into, say, a Riven, and then have Jinx be like an item holder. But Quicksilver is kind of a weak slam early, and it's a little bit dicey, so I'm not entirely sure if I'm sold on that. Item Grab Bag can give him direction. The only tricky thing is he sort of already has nailed down what he wants to play, which is early game AD ranged carry through Jinx. So if you hit something that's kind of specific, like a Death Cap or a AP item like Sparks, it's kind of awkward for his composition. I guess he theoretically could try to play around with it, but with bow, glove, and cloak, it's very specific, like what he wants to be leaning towards for his early game items. And you don't want to necessarily try to shift directions and pivot so early into the game when you kind of have that strong direction. And Cybernetic Uplink is considered to be weak early. It's much more of a late game oriented augment in general. We've talked about this a couple times already. And I just don't think it's very good right now because you also want to slam items and be strong early as opposed to spread them out. Terry rerolls and has a cybernetic bulk, and now he's considering all 3 of these options with the team building, item grab bag, and cybernetic bulk. They're all totally fine to play around. Cybernetic bulk is much more powerful than cybernetic uplink in the early game because you just get the flat amount of HP early as opposed to kind of a little bit of HP and then hope that, mana per second can help you get that extra cast. 200 HP early is a lot. It's the same reason why things like a target dummy is really powerful early and why they kept nerfing that kind of stuff over multiple patches, because having a raw amount of HP early, just having like things that can just get in the way and having more HP can often swing those early game fights when it's just skirmishes between 3 and 4 units. Scouting around and pulling up things like the team builder, because I think he's not entirely sure if he wants to commit to something like cybernetic bulk. He does have best friends, which I also think is pretty solid for Punk in general. You do want a lot of the attack speed to convert off of that AD. He rerolls and he gets Caretaker's Ally, which gives you a 2-cost every time you level. And that could be something that also is pretty strong in the meta game right now. There's a lot of good 2-costs that you can theoretically play around. I know that this is a pretty unpopular augment in general, but I have to say that I think now that 2-costs are in a better state balance-wise, you can actually play around it pretty decently as long as you have a more flexible item set. Things like Seraphine and Kale are much stronger now, and Katarina is back on the menu if you're able to hit it. Twitch is also reliable. So there's a lot of different things you can hit with Caretaker's Ally that can help you snowball your lead while having early game tempo by guaranteeing 2-star. He ends up choosing Caretaker's Ally, which is probably because he doesn't know if he wants to hard commit to the Punk yet. Also, there's an option for him to get things like Pantheon and Twitch, so it could have theoretically been very, very good. And in the worst case scenario, it ends up being Econ. I think in the end, I would have probably favored Best Friends, but that's because I have the hindsight of knowing that he played a punk line this game, and therefore I would have picked something that's a little bit better. He chose to try to thread the needle and make sure that he is open to other possibilities and play around whatever the game can give him instead of just saying, okay, I have 4 copies of Jinx, me Jinx, and just says, you know, that's it. He hit another Jinx too. So he could actually end up playing like Jinx, and Vi. Just want to make sure that he can also get a lot of gold. I think some people here actually feel tempted to like, you know, hold a bunch of pairs, and you hear it all the time. With Punk, you want to win the early game because you want to have as strong of a board as you possibly can to preserve that HP. But at the same time, you don't necessarily want to always try to do that at the sacrifice of Econ, because you need to try to get to those interest thresholds breakpoints as much as you can so you can roll a bunch of gold and all in and get all those 3 stars somewhere around stage 3. Ends up putting just a bow onto Jinx. If this is the case, he's trying to think about playing around the Rage Blade on Jinx. But in this comp, he's going to specifically be looking to play around Vi 3 as his main carry. And this is going to be different because Jinx ends up becoming a support secondary carry as opposed to Vi, who's our main damage dealer and our main threat. With Vi specifically, she doesn't actually really want a lot of bow items. She wants sword items. It's a really good compliment to Jinx because Jinx wants all the bow items. She wants Lost Whisper, Runins, Giant Slayer, Rage Blade, etc. And Vi wants things like Bloodthirster, Giant Slayer, Edge of Night. And so another way you can kind of think about playing Punk could be if you get slammed with a bunch of bows and bow-related items, you can go for Jinx. You have a bunch of swords and sword-related items, you can go a lot for Vi. At this point, we have 6 Jinxes, and our streak has kind of been broken, so it's a little bit uneven. So making sure that he's making 20 is actually a big deal. He gets a rod off the carousel, but as you see, there's also a Twitch with the sword, so a little bit interesting to try and go for the rod immediately for Rage Blade. I think this is a nod to the fact that he wants to try to have high tempo, and Rage Blade on Jinx is... Many people consider Rage Blade to be the most mandatory item on Jinx, and so that way you can have like a smooth curve of power. And so he's going to forego that, even though we know that he's going to try to be playing around Vi carry here. And right now, he's trying to focus on just Jinx being the star of his composition because he has 6 Jinxes, he has 2 Vis. He's just leaning into the Jinx right now because he started off with the bow drop. Another way you can kind of tell like how the game is feeding you is the starting components that you have from things like the PV rounds on stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. There's a limit to how many number of components you can get. This is to make sure that you don't get dropped like cloak, 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 cloak. Even though some games it feels like that does happen, it is actually protections in the game to stop that from happening. And so whatever you pick off of carousel doesn't count towards that theoretical invisible bag that you reach into and grab into. And so that's something to consider with your item components. It's not really relevant right now, but just keep that in mind in the future whenever you're in a situation where you're thinking about what to pick off carousel. He's more likely to find things like swords, for example, than bows because he already got a bow dropped. Okay, so Terry ends up going the perfect switching gears, inconsistency, lose, win, lose, win, lose, win. And his spot is okay because he does have 6 Jinxes, but it's kind of awkward to say the least because his streak is non-existent and he's playing Caretaker's Chosen, which helps him get more gold because as he hits 5, he's going to get, you know, an extra Gnar, so he can sell that Gnar. At this point, he's using Caretaker's Ally as an economic base to fuel his mid game as opposed to try to play around that Gnar, and that's totally fine. That shows versatility in his gameplay. He's selling everything that he knows is not going to be Punk related. He actually thought about a while back holding things like the Vex and the Urgot because they could be powerful used to play in the mid game, but not the expensive economy. Kind of unfortunate item drops here because we have a rod and a tier. Those are not necessarily the correct items that you really want to play for with Punk, so a bit of a low roll there. Actually, pretty significant low roll now that I'm thinking about it because he doesn't have an item that he's excited to slam onto Jinx. And he's rolling down to 20-ish area. He can actually sell it to 30 and hold on to this Vi as well, so he has 8 Vis and 7 Jinxes. But it's not looking too great at the moment. And now he's getting 5-0'd and Jinx and Punk wants to win this mid-stage of the game. So yeah, it's looking pretty rough right now. Maybe the 3-2 augment can help bail us out and give us something that's really good. I'm thinking about something like Missed Connections that can be really good to help us just hit the Vi 3 and potentially Jinx like very quickly. It is a gold tier augment. Little Buddies is on the far left here and does not really work because we're not playing around many 4 and 5 costs. Even though you do end up wanting to play around a lot of 1 and 2 costs with Punk, you're not going to get Little Buddies value for for a very long time. So that's got to be off the table. Gifts of the Fallen is a decent combat augment. You have to think about it, does it make sense for your composition? And with Punk, you only are playing a few amount of units because you're going to be under level compared to everybody else. So that's one thing. Gifts of the Fallen is lower value because you're playing level 5, level 6 versus level 7, level 8 a lot of times. So you don't have actually that many units and champions on the board to get a lot of gifts value. The second aspect of it is gifts gives you flat stats like flat AD and flat AP. Does that actually matter when you're getting all those like flat AP stats already from Punk rolling? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it doesn't hurt, but it's not particularly that important because you already have all those flat stats. If you're playing something like Executioners, for example, that gives you a bunch of crit, you want to have that high base number to multiply off of that crit. I think Gifts of the Fallen here is not particularly that good. Jewel Lotus is actually not bad if you have those base stats, right? It's going the other direction of Gifts of the Fallen. Gifts of the Fallen gives you like, you know, here's the flat AD and AP. Here's the actual crit, so you can multiply off of that. And so it's okay, but in the compositions that play like Executioners and Jinx, it's not necessarily as good as you would think it would be. Like, there's a reason why people don't really suggest putting Infinity Edge on Jinx is because the ability to crit doesn't really interact with her ability very well. And also, if you have Executioners, you already kind of get the benefit of Jeweled Lotus already. And so it's not necessarily as good as it could be compared to putting it in other compositions that just want that raw ability to amplify their damage. But it's a nice fallback option in case he doesn't have anything better. Rolls 2 of his augments and has Long Distance Pals and Salvage Bin. Long Distance Pals actually is not that bad in Punk because you have so much stats that you're sharing, right? You have so much AD that you get from rolling and in the trait that if you're able to get Long Distance Pals value, you end up sharing a lot of AD. The only awkward thing is a lot of times with Punk, you want to position on the same side as your, you know, Vi and your Poppy and your Jinx, all the units that you do want to Long Distance Pals because you want to try to bulldoze past a tank as fast as you can. And Long Distance Pals will end up encouraging him to put them on the opposite ends. Or if you put like Twitch and Jinx, for example, and Long Distance Pals those two units, you end up having them attack a different target. So it can be a little bit awkward for positioning. Salvage Bin is a decent fallback option because his items are quite frankly very awkward and he has like Rod and Tier. Like, how do you actually end up using that? Salvage Bin not only gives you the option of, you know, of course, having item flexibility and temporary item holders, but maybe late stage in the game, he can break apart an emblem, say like a true damage emblem, get the sword and the spatula, and then combine to a Punk emblem. Something you can think about in the back of your mind. So I don't mind taking it here if he wants a option to fix his items. But then again, it doesn't take combat power, which Punk kind of needs to multiply off of their base stats. So it could be a little bit sketchy in the late game. Not to mention that it's also a little bit awkward with Salvage Bin because you're not often playing temporary units. You're playing permanent units because you're rolling for Jinx 3, you're not going to sell that Jinx 3 later on. So she's not really an item holder. Salvage Bin is much better if you're trying to go from like 1 cost to 2 cost to 4 cost to 5 cost. Rolls the Jeweled Lotus and has Harm Assist. Harm Assist is fine. It's also another like good fallback option. It's decent. And Harm Assist is a lot better for melee carries, but in this current meta where there's a lot of Karthus and backline access with Akali and whatnot, even that Viego, having Harm Assist to heal up as a backline carry can be a pretty decent option. Ends up taking Salvage Bin, and I think it's just a nod to the fact of how unhappy he is with his items. Funny enough, he gets a Gnar from Naturaling to level 5 and has a Gnar 2 in his shop, but that is surprisingly very difficult for his economy to support because you have to sell a bunch of other things. Does end up rolling a couple more times, and wow, he's rolling down to 0 to find Jinx 3. That is really aggressive. A lot of people don't actually recommend doing something like this because it's so hard to rebound economically. But I think Terry recognizes that he's been win-losing so much throughout the early stages of the game that his economy is already in shambles. And also, he still needs to preserve some of that HP with Punk, which is really, really crucial. He makes a Bloodthirster onto Vi. If you do itemize Vi, you want to itemize her similar to how you itemize a Zed or a Viego. You want to give her Edge of Night and then survive abilities plus some AD. Vi actually scales really well with AD. But at the same time, you don't want to give her like pure AD, like Deathblade, Infinity Edge, and things like that, because she ends up getting into the action a little bit too quickly, and she is a 1-cost melee unit, so she ends up being a little bit more fragile than you want her to be. The Edge of Night helps her drop aggression, kind of like Yasuo, and then you want to give her like an AD item plus some healing so she can sustain herself. Terry has rolled down to 0 and successfully hit the Jinx 3, but my god, we are broke. We have no economy whatsoever. This is almost a true 0, where like the only things we're holding are the very bare minimum units that we can hold to help, you know, 2-star things like a Mumu. The nice thing is maybe this is where Caretaker's ally ends up being nice because we have the ability to get things like an extra Gnar as time goes on and sell that for economy. Oh, if you can get this spatula, that would be amazing on Carousel. I mean, he's third pick. This is also another like awkward downside. Like he preserved HP, but as a result of preserving HP, he kind of got like punished for like winning a couple of rounds here on 3-2 and 3-3. Because if he lost, he could have got the emblem. At the same time, if he got the emblem, he already made a hand of justice because he wanted to just try to get item tempo onto the board. Overall, just a really awkward early mid game here for Terry. I think a lot of people would just say like this spot is looking like you're playing for like a fifth or a sixth. And if you're playing in tournament, this is sometimes a strategy that you should be thinking about. Like TFT is not such a black and white game where top 4 is a success, top 2 you're like, you know, you're doing great, top 1 you're high rolling. Like, a lot of people have these like codified rules in their mind of like what success means in TFT, but sometimes turning like what could easily be an 8th place into a 5th place even feels better than just, you know, getting a guaranteed victory from the get-go because you're playing like Wandering Trainer and things like that. I mean, those games are fun as well, don't get me wrong. Just that I think a lot of players, as you continue to improve, get even more satisfaction from salvaging what could be an 8th place into a pretty decent placement. He's still using his punk roll every single turn. I think this is correct because I think a lot of people look at this situation and say, I'm so broke, I need to save up my econ. But remember, punk is a scaling trait that depends on you rolling your gold to actually get stronger, and you also get cheap discounted rolls. So that is a nice thing to still actually be able to roll every single turn. But make no mistake, his spot is very, very awkward. Thinking about whether or not he wants to slam an item, the sword is kind of off limits because he wants an Edge of Night, and clearly he's playing around Vi as his main carry, and Vi really wants that Edge of Night as her last item. Gets a salvage bin item. Salvage bin gives you an item every few rounds. That's another benefit of salvage bin that people often overlook, just the, you know, item economy that you can get in the mid game. And gets an Edge of Night, so now you can slam an Edge of Night onto this Vi, and that does take care of at least one problem, which was his items. The other problem is his economy. Does end up selling to make 20, and with these items here, he can make Edge of Night and probably start stacking Pantheon with defensive items. Pantheon's not actually that good of a tank because he falls off and his ability doesn't really synergize with Punk very well. So a lot of times in this spot, you end up wanting giving Pantheon a lot of utility items. He holds things like Sunfire or Even Shroud or Redemption, right? A lot of things that like are beneficial on a frontline melee tank unit, but also like a secondary benefit for healing or shred or anti-heal, things like that. So in this case, I'd probably recommend just putting whatever combination items onto a Pantheon instead of trying to make something awkward like a adaptive. Actually, the more I look at it, it's not like we even have an option of putting items onto Jinx. All these items are terrible on Jinx, so you're not really looking to slam anything here. It has to be just defensive items on a Mumu or Pantheon. Okay, Edge of Night and Stone Plate. He can go for like a vow. That's also fine. Just, you know, get the items onto the board. A lot of people just, when they're not happy with their items, they just keep it on their bench. But remember, if it's on your bench and you're trying to play for things like a streak, he's on a 4 streak right now, you need to get those items in play so you have value. And it's not worth greeting because you might think, oh, I have salvage bin, like I could theoretically wait and make all these amazing items. It's not worth greeting because you have a carousel coming up and you only can make one item off of that component. So you're like, okay, this tier could be a Redemption and this vest could be a Sunfire. And it's like you have all these different things, but you need to wait an entire stage to be able to get like 2 components unless you get exactly the component you want off of the 4-2 augment. So just slam those items. And that's why a lot of top players always say just slam your items at the very beginning of TFT as you're learning, get them in play so you're getting value off of them as opposed to waiting and just dying with a full bench. Okay, now that I'm done yapping about why you slam your items, let's go ahead and take a look at these augments here at 4-2. Return on investment is actually quite a good augment for Punk in general because you're using a lot of cheap rolls and that does count towards return on investment. So it's kind of like half off for how expensive this usually is. Usually it costs 16 rolls, so you're thinking like, okay, like 32 gold. But in reality, it's half of that, which is a lot cheaper. Yeah, I would definitely pay 16 gold for a Tactician's Crown. Support cash can be decent. It's a little bit harder to play around it now. Usually you take support cash in the beginning game, so you can craft a game plan around it that makes sense. So if you're picking things like a Banshees early, you can craft your game plan so you know what to play into. In the late stages of the game, if you're picking things like support cash, it ends up being a little bit more gambly, like you're trying to fish for a specific item, or it's like an option that you think is like solid, you're not entirely sure. You can take like a bunch of different things that are generic, like Locket and Zeke's, or things that just like are pretty solid, like Aegis. So support cash is like a decent option late game, but the more you're trying to look for a specific item with support cash, the worse it is. Portable Forge, kind of the same thing. It's like late game, you get a few options, and some anvils can be nuts. Like if you're playing an AP champion that really wants Zonias, it could be like disgusting. But also sometimes you get hit with like, you know, Mogul's Mail and Anima Visage and Eternal Winter, and you need carry items. It could be really, really awkward. So out of all these options, I think I like return on investment the most right now. Support cash I could also see see because the way he's positioning is actually quite good for a lot of support items. So I think that could also be decent. He rerolls all 3, and he has big grab bag, remember your roots, and unified resistance. One thing to know is that he doesn't have any combat augments whatsoever. And if you took like an item-based augment, once again, no combat augments, and punk, lower tier comp and power because you're relying much on one cost, needs that combat power. So big grab bag has to be off the table. He has too many items already with the salvage bin and the amount of items he's going to get. And it's not like reforging like the rod's going to do much here. So absolutely off the table. Big grab bag would make more sense if there was a spatula already and he can try to fish for like a punk emblem. Remember your roots is pretty decent when you're playing like a reroll comp with a vertical, and ends up being pretty solid in other 4-cost comps too, like disco, where you want to play that vertical. In this spot though, you already have a lot of HP, and the attack speed is okay. It's not bad actually. It's just I think unified resistance is the clear winner because you have so much HP. If you get resistances, you multiply that defensiveness in a really healthy way. Because if you just get more HP, you're just getting more of the same thing. But TFT, you want to multiply all your stats. Health gets more effective when you have resistances, because that just means that your HP is going to be more valuable. So you want HP, resistance, damage reduction. Same thing with damage, right? If you have AD, you don't want just more AD. You want to have crit and attack speed, so you're doing more DPS output, multiplying them instead of adding them. So Unify is the clear winner here for me. Ends up hitting a Mumu 2. And don't look now, but we're actually streaking with 5 streak right now with Vi 3. We're going against people who have Z2 and Ezreal playing the 80 flex, at level 7 Alawi, which is also kind of filthy. Oh, actually, they're probably at level 8 because they have a headliner Poppy. Wow, what a strong board to be going up against. This lobby already starting to heat up in terms of how hard some people are hitting. Wait, that's the AFK guy? He's at 53 HP and he hit everything? Oh my gosh. This lobby's going to cap really high at this current clip if that's the person that was like, you know, AFK streaking. Yone 3 also in the lobby. Pentakill, Karthus Akali, like a lot of strong boards. In this point of the game with Punk, you're not really like thinking about much because the game plan is pretty straightforward. And now we're set into the path that we have, which is like, you know, every turn just build up our economy and roll once for Punk. Make sure to get unified resistance value, just, you know, position 3-3. The most important thing is to think about what are some of the matches we potentially can win and bleed out slower than other opponents. We try to see the weak side of people's comps. The thing that Terry's scouting around is where's the tank and how can I either avoid it or take advantage of the fact that maybe this tank is not well supported and try to bulldoze our way through. The biggest problem though is that he has no armor reduction, no Last Whisper, no Sundering whatsoever through Even Shroud. I mean, that's part of the reason why you might even consider things that might give you any kind of shred, like even Obsidian Cleaver, if you can get that through an augment, for example. But yeah, kind of rough. Does end up leveling to 7 and try to maintain his HP. I think at this point he's recognized that he has to play for placements, and I like that he's rolling here. A lot of people just level to 7, play another unit, and try to go immediately to 8. But at this point, he's recognized that the game is starting to slip through his fingers in terms of whether or not he's able to get to the top 4. Because yes, he did a good job streaking all the way to 4-2, but now everyone's spiking. Everyone hit the Yone 3. They're hitting their 2-star 4 cost. Everyone's getting their pentakill online with pentakill emblem. And now we're taking some immense damage. And this doesn't mean that rolling was wrong. You never know if rolling ended up helping preserve even just a little bit of HP. If he rolls here at 7, hits an Urgot 2, and able to like tech in, you know, an extra Guardian, for example, that might be the difference of killing 1 or 2 units. And those 1 or 2 units kills could be everything in this game. It's really close in HP as well. 40, 38, 36, 34. Like just, you know, 3 units separate 4 placements right now. It's kind of wild. Oh, wow. This is a fight where positioning mattered a lot. We're going to go ahead and rewind actually right after this because I think he wins this fight because of the way he positioned. And that's a crucial round that we won because we capitalized on it. Going back, you see how Terry is scouting for his opponents and try to go for a swap. He missed on the Amumu, but that's okay. But look at where his opponent's weak side is. The weak side is on this right side because it's an Olaf 2. And if you get past the Olaf 2, it's a Poppy 1 with no items. Compare that to having to go through a set 1. And yeah, it's a set 1, but he has 3 items. And you're also on the same side as Ezreal, who will be targeting things like that Vi and that Jhin as well. And you have to go through a Yorick. And also, like, Yorick might summon the Ghoul, so it can be kind of problematic to get through this side in general. So by going through the weak side, he's going to eliminate a lot of units. At the worst case scenario, even if he loses, he's not going to lose by much. So this is a really good example of trying to bulldoze people's weak sides and making sure that you're able to get through very, very quickly. The only thing about it is that because we have unified, we have to put this Urgot in the back. In the ideal scenario, you put Urgot like here in the second row because you want Jinx, Urgot, and Vi to all be attacking the same unit so you can efficiently get through. And Urgot also got buffed, so he now is better against single target. So yeah, this is something to consider with how you end up positioning. A lot of people say, you know, Punk is brain dead, but you really want to min-max everything you can get out of this comp because you don't really get much to play with late game. So he wins that fight. Excellent job by Terry, and now He might be stuck rolling on 7 till the end of the game because he's low economy. And I'm not entirely sure if he can get to 8 and play a 4th Guardian, which would be huge. He hits a spatula off of the creep rounds, which is a big deal. And he hits a glove, so we can make a punk emblem. Who does he want a punk emblem? I think I want to put it on Urgot or Aphelios, just like for a little bit more DPS. He's rolling a lot to see if he can find Twitch. The big problem is he actually didn't think he was going to hit this emblem, so he doesn't have the Twitch, finds the Twitch, and now is able to get the punk online. Wow, huge. You can go for Deathblade, Crown Guard. Okay, so it gets 2nd item Jinx, 3 item on Pantheon. This 6 punk may have got him in the top 4. I think if he didn't, he was probably going to, peter out into a 5th. But now he has the ability to actually go for this top 4. And every single fight win here at this point could be a placement diff. Wow, what a huge moment here for Terry. And if he didn't hit this punk emblem, I think a lot of people are like, well, he just got bailed out. Well, honestly, I do feel like the game kind of owed him a little bit, right? His items have been kind of awkward. He has no streak. His matchmaking has been tough going up against people who spiked, like the Ezreal player that hit Poppy 2 and Z2. Now he's back and he's stronger than before. So I felt like he was due for some kind of high roll. And now he's going up against this matchup and looks like he does lose again, but it's not going to be as bad of a loss. 25 HP. Oh man, this is actually going to be a nail biter because I could see him easily losing twice and then dying or narrowly, escaping death. Someone hits Yorick too. Oh god. Our positioning is a little bit. Oh, I see. Okay, so he actually feigned as if he was going to be on the right side. So he kept Amumu on the left side. So he lightened the load of his APM by putting his Vi and his Jinx here, and then knew that he was going to switch to the other side at the last second. I see. I was looking at his position. I was like, it's a little bit sus because he spread out too much and you want to make it efficient. But at the last second, knew that he was just trying to juke his opponents. And that's kind of what you just have to do. You have to play like some 50-50 mind games in the late game scenarios. There's a Yorick with the Thieves Gloves. That is pretty close to the ideal unit he can get, but does not get it. Picks up a red buff off of the carousel because he recognizes he still doesn't have anti-heal. In fact, he doesn't have anti-heal and armor reduction still, by the way. So yes, the punk emblem is high roll, but if you're kind of like thinking about it, a lot of things have not been going perfectly this game for him because the two things we talk about all the time, you want shred and you want anti-heal in every composition right now. And he barely has half of that in the middle of stage 5. That is a Yorick 2 on the other side, focusing on this Vi. I do think Vi taking a little bit too much aggression. I would kind of wish that Mumu was next to her. Wait a second, never mind. She just apparently is a total Chad and just takes it on the chin. Never mind about the never mind. We just got 6-0. This is looking very, very close. 8 HP in a dream. He skipped a bunch of Urgots. At this point, kind of wondering whether or not he could have gone for Urgot 3. He's holding on to Aphelios as if he wants to think about Aphelios 3. But I think that part of the reason why things went so badly is, one, our opponents are really, really strong. But two, we're not positioning kind of like what we're doing right now, which is, having everything on one side and focus firing. This is much better positioning. Trying to get through this spark is very quick. And oh my god, the Vi goes to the back line. Vi ends up dying to Ahri. This is such a close fight. Jinx ends up targeting the Ahri as well. Oh my god, it's so close. The margins are so thin here. So it looks like he's at least gotten that top 5, but it's low-key like top 3able because if he's able to get good matchmaking and because of the HP he preserved, look at it, 8 HP is 1 unit per fight for 4 fights throughout the entire game, or even 2 units in 2 fights. It's just very, very slim. And so he could have died at a lot of different intervals, but with good matchmaking he can actually get to the top 3 because 2 people could theoretically die if he gets a really good matchup into somebody who he positions well for. He's looking for Amumu 3, and he'd rather itemize the Amumu 3. He replaces the Urgot with the Punk emblem, and now he's trying to remake things. Punk emblem onto Aphelios because he just feels like it's not been good enough on Urgot. He actually has the belt off of the Sterix gauge that he could have deconstructed with Salvage Bin and then made an Even Shroud to play onto the Amumu because he had the cloak available through Stoneplate. So he did have the option to actually play for the armor reduction. But I mean, that's part of what makes Salvage Bin so hard. There's so many things going on. And he ended up hitting the Amumu 3, which is a really big deal. And he did get the good matchmaking. He got the ghost. So another thing that was fortunate happened. So he's in the top 4. He reforged the Hodge because at this point, I think we recognize Urgot 2 has fallen off. Urgot 2 is an early mid-game bully. Late game, he's not really doing much. And unless he went for an Urgot 3, it wasn't going to actually do a lot in this late stages of the game. Oh my gosh, we're back at the well again. It's the Zed and the Ezreal 80 flex player. Zed and Vi both dropped aggression onto each other, but Vi ends up winning the duel, and Ezreal's inting like usual, and he gets the win. Holy smokes, this guy got a second with this. That was excellent positioning that round as well, because he had the Vi on the opposite side of the Ezreal. Even though she has Edge of Night, you don't really want these units to take all that aggro too quickly. We find a Poppy, so we're going to itemize the Poppy with Punk and Hodge. We've been waiting for this Poppy for a long time now. Didn't get the good positioning we wanted, and this could be the last fight of the game. Actually, maybe it ends up being good because the Akali goes to the bottom right and maybe starts focusing on the Poppy instead. This is looking kind of like we're dead. Little buddies, Gargantuan Resolve onto the Pentakill. That's just a really, really powerful setup to overcome. But man, second with this comp and this spot was very good result, and I think Terry should be happy with how this game ended up panning out. So Terry had a really rough start, and yeah, some things needed to fall his way in the late game with a combination of getting that Punk emblem or to have good matchmaking at the very end. But at the same time, you saw how all the small things that he was trying to do to preserve HP mattered. You can point to many different things in the game where rolling down in stage 3 to 0 to try to make sure you can hit and win a fight or two could have been the difference. Or whether or not he was able to get a round win narrowly through positioning, or trying to optimize by slamming his items a little bit earlier, even though they're suboptimal, could have also made a difference. So those small, profound things could have changed what could have been like a 5th or a 6th all the way to a top 2. You're not going to get lucky if you don't survive long enough to get lucky. And I think Terry showed us a really good execution of this CN Vi build. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thanks for watching this episode of In Too Deep, and I'll see you guys next time.